Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kings of Fantasy Football. I'm your co-host, Pablo, and here's my co-host.
Leo.
So, on today's episode, we are going to be discussing starts and sits for Week 12. Um, so, pretty much in the home stretch. Um, so we'll kick things off with quarterbacks. So, the quarterback that I'm gonna start, never would have thought that I would say his name this year, but I'm all aboard the hype train of Bryce Young. Last week he had a breakout game, and props to him, man, because I know he's kind of been going through it since he came into the league. But last year he went off for 448 yards, 3 touchdowns. Um, and I saw some posts that because of this performance, moving into like next year, um, is he going to be a QB1? Meaning that you can kind of start him every week. We'll get into that, maybe in the off season, but um, I definitely would start him after this breakout game. What about you, Leo?
Yeah, this week I'm gonna go and hook my train to the to Jared Goff week. This week he has a very juicy matchup against the Giants. The Giants have allowed the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. Jared Goff, he's coming off a tough game because he did play for Philly last week. But prior to that, he faced Washington, who allowed the sixth most fantasy points. That he scored 33 fantasy points plus, and then even Minnesota, that they're fairly tough. He was able to score 23 on them. So they are playing the Giants at home, and I see him being able to definitely um, produce plenty of fantasy points for fantasy managers this week. So I'll go with Jared Goff.
Hope so, man, because I have Alman Raw in one league and he did not show up last week. Now, moving on to quarterbacks to sit, so kind of in the same conversation. So if Goff could not have a good game against the Eagles with those weapons, then I highly doubt in a rivalry game that Prescott's going to be able to do anything. So that is the quarterback that I would sit, even though he had a really good week last week. But that was, whole different story, whole different defense. So I would sit Prescott. What about you?
Yeah. So for my sit this week, I'm gonna go with I'm actually gonna sit Daniel Jones. He's had a very good year this year, but this week they're going up against Kansas City that that they that they're fairly, that their defense has been coming on pretty well. Um, over the over these last few games, they were able to hold Jalen Hurts to 11.5 fantasy points, Lamar Jackson to 12, even Jared Goff to 20, and obviously Geno Smith is even though he's a NFL quarterback, he held him to 2.8 fantasy points, and even Marcus Mariota was held to 13 fantasy points. So over the last few weeks, they've been able to hold fairly decent quarterbacks down, and that should continue this week. Kansas City, they're the the Colts. Daniel Jones is more of a uh, like proven that he's better when he's throwing inside. But unfortunately, this game's gonna be at Kansas City, and Kansas City is a tough place to play. So I think he's gonna have a tough one this week.
Oh no, man. Maybe Daniel Jones finally shows up against a good team. So we'll see.
We'll
Kind of
see.
moving on to running backs. The running back that I would start this week is going to be Derrick Henry. So now with Lamar back under center, they faced a tough defense last week in Cleveland, and he ran the ball for 18 times, 103 yards, and a touchdown. And this week, they are at home against the Jets, and they did a fire sale over there in New York. So a lot of those good defensive players are gone. So I would not be surprised if um, he has a really monster game. So definitely would start Derrick Henry this week. What about you?
Yeah, so this week I'm gonna go with Kenneth. Sorry, I'm gonna go with Kenneth Walker. He's going up against Tennessee. That they've been very lackluster this year. They haven't done much. So that even though the defense has been a little better, like with towards the pass, but they do allow a lot of point totals and fantasy points to running backs this year. So I see that they should be able to. They've allowed at least 7 running backs to score at least over 14 PPR fantasy points this season, and a total of 14 touchdowns. So to me, that Kenneth Walker has been proven over the last few weeks that he's getting more touches than Charbonnet. So I think that he should come through big time this week.
Yeah, I agree. Now kind of hope for my sake that Sharp maybe gets some goal line carries like he has been, because I think he's had like 4 rushing touchdowns the last few weeks in total, which is more than some starting running backs, which is crazy. Now the running back that I would sit, um, and I'm going strictly based off the matchup and the fact that they did not give him the ball at all last week, and I'm talking about Ashton Genty. And I know Genty owners don't want to hear that because
I don't.
they they faced the worst one of the worst rushing defenses, didn't give him the ball, and now they're going up against a much better defense than the Cleveland Browns. I feel like Myles Garrett gets multiple sacks every week. Bro's crazy. So for those reasons, I would say Jonty. What about you?
Yeah, the running back that I'm gonna sit, that he was kind of like a hot waiver wire pickup a few weeks back, and that's Tyrone Tracy. Ever since Camp Schedule went down, uh, you know, every fantasy manager has been starting him, but he hasn't been able to really produce as much for fantasy managers. Uh, he's also playing against the Detroit Lions, who are number one against the run. And on top of that, Devin Singletary has also, been scoring touchdowns on top of that. So I would definitely stay away from Tyrone Tracy this week if you can.
All right. Moving on to wide receivers. So one of the reasons why I kind of said I don't know about Jones being a sit is because my wide receiver to start is actually going to be one of his receivers, which is Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce, the last 2 weeks, he's been slowly getting some chemistry with Daniel Jones. So against Pittsburgh, he had 13 targets, which is a crazy amount. 13 targets, 6 catches, 115. Last week, 7 targets, 4 catches for 84 yards and a touchdown. If they have any chance of going into Kansas City and winning, is that they got to score points. So that offense has to be clicking on all cylinders. Or if they're down by a lot, garbage time points I would take as well. But again, I think especially after the bye, hopefully they came up with a game plan to come out strong against the Chiefs. So I would start Pierce. What about you?
Well, one guy that um, that I think I'm gonna give a couple guys. One is the easy answer I think to me is Jameson Williams. He has a nice matchup against the Giants that they're allowing like the fifth most fantasy points to receivers this year. But on top of that, Sam Laporta is out. Now that Dan Campbell is calling the plays, Jameson's his arrows pointing way up for fantasy managers, as he's been producing very well for fantasy managers this week. Well, these last couple of games. So if you have him, roll him out there because he's been on fire the last couple of weeks. The last 3 weeks actually. Against Minnesota, he had 16.60 fantasy points. Against Washington, a couple weeks back, 23, and then even this past week against Philly, which is a tough defense, he was able to score 19 over 19 fantasy points, which is against a good defense. So they're playing the Giants. They allow the six most. So I would roll with Jameis. Another one to maybe look at is Chris Olave. Olave has been they traded away Rashid Shaheed out of the down to Seattle, and he's had a decent connection with Tyler Show over since he's become receiver, since he's been quarterback. Sorry, and Olave has scored at least over 14 fantasy points in the last 3 games with against the Falcons. That's their matchup this week. So I think he has a chance to get it going this week as well.
Yeah, man, that looks like a lot of these rookie QBs, man, they come in, I don't know what they're eating. You had Dart, now you got Show. So, props to rookie QBs, especially being relevant in fantasy. Now, moving on to tight ends is going to be a no-brainer, but I do want to kind of mention that it's weird that the injury of your starting quarterback would actually be beneficial to your tight end. I'm talking about Trey McBride. So ever since Kyler's been hurt on first IR stint, and now he's another IR stint, pretty much revitalized McBride as far as fantasy relevance. I saw a stat that with Kyler under center, I think he had like 2 touchdowns in like years with Kyler, and now with Dobbins under center, he's had like 4 touchdowns in like 4 weeks. So I think that's just gonna continue. Again, pretty much the rest of the year. So I would start. Bride, what about you?
Give me 1 second.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry. Before I forgot about the receiver to sit. So the receiver that I would sit is DK Metcalf. So DK Metcalf is as far as being the wide receiver 1 over there in Pittsburgh. He has not had a good campaign this year. And the last 3 weeks, so in Indy he had 4 targets, 2 receptions for 6 yards. The week after that, 7 targets, 3 receptions for 35, and then last week against Cincinnati, who has one of the worst defenses, 8 targets, 5 receptions for 49 yards. So I think especially now as these last few weeks become much more important as far as wins and losses for trying to make a playoff push, I would say Metcalf.
I know you said it to start Trey McBride too, but
I don't have him, but if I wish I did.
me either. He was too rich for my blood, but yeah, he's definitely a start. Metcalf is tough to trust. The other quarterback, the other receiver that I'm gonna, it hurts me to say because I drafted him earlier this year in a couple leagues and I traded for him. So, but it's gonna be a Jordan Addison. So far he hasn't really been able to really connect well with JJ McCarthy. JJ McCarthy really, I think, has been a little disappointing for fantasy managers. A lot of people thought, with those weapons that he has Jefferson, Hawkinson, Addison, those two running backs, Mason and Aaron Jones, and to me, he's not getting it done. So and on top of that, they're playing the Packers who have a tough defense, and at Green Bay on top of it. So to me, Addison's a sit for me this week. In terms of the tight ends to start this week, I'm gonna go with the with your favorite. Well, I'll go with another one just in case. Yeah, we're gonna go. I was gonna say Kyle Pitts, but I don't wanna poke you no more with Kyle Pitts because I know he's the only to me he's the only receiving option right now with Drake out. But that's someone to start. And they're going up against the Saints, so that should be he has the opportunity to do some damage there. But the other tight end to start is kind of goes hand in hand with Olave, and that's been Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson has been very productive over the last few weeks, and he's coming off a bye, so he might have been available to pick up this past couple of weeks because since he was out, but definitely he has a chance to come through for fantasy managers this week. Um, Even though the Falcons are allowing the uh, the third fewest fantasy points, they this guy has been on fire the last 4 weeks as he's scored over double digits in each of the last 4 games. Over 12 points at Chicago, 10 for Tampa Bay against Tampa Bay. A tough Rams defense, 12, and then against Carolina, that's also kind of tough against as well. That they scored 19 fantasy points against them. So he's been producing, and then they there's not many options other than Olave. He should be the second most targeted probably receiver there, receiving option for Mr. Cho. So yeah, I would try to go with Johnson if you have.
Hope so, man, because I dropped the guy that I'm about to mention of who to sit for him. And as far as the tight end that I would sit is gonna be Kyle Pitts. I rode with him all year, stuck with him for 11 weeks, and this week I was like, all right, I want a divorce because I thought with Penix, I'm like, okay, maybe. Like everyone's been talking about the last 3 or 4 years that, he has a good year. And then now that Penix is out for the year, you have Cousins under center and, no disrespect to Cousins, but, I after he came in, I was like, okay, maybe he will show something. Um, he showed some flashes, but, considering he's getting up there in age, and even though Drake London is out, I just don't know if I could risk starting Pitts, and especially it's crunch time and need to get some wins to secure a spot. I would sit Pitts. What about you?
All right, yeah, the tight end I'm gonna sit this week is David Njoku. Not only is he's playing against a shockingly tough Raiders defense that's allowing the fourth fewest uh, fantasy points to tight ends this season, but he also has to deal with Harold Fannin, that the rookie that's been basically the starter to me in my eyes. I would rather start Fannin than Njoku going forward. So just with those two things, he hasn't done much over the last few weeks. He's last week he only scored against the Ravens 1.70. So, and like I said, they're playing the Raiders, who have like I said, a tough defense, even tougher than Baltimore, which is shockingly to believe. But yeah, I would definitely sit in Juku. It's tough to trust.
Yeah, Fannin been looking good over there, and then me and Sanders starting this week, who Who knows what he's gonna do? Now, last thing is defenses. So kind of mentioned it earlier in the conversation, but I would start the Browns defense. Again, saw a stat of Myles Garrett. I think having like the most sacks before a certain age, and been he already has over 10 for the year. I just think, especially this week, he has a pretty favorable matchup against Las Vegas. And, Dallas did somewhat good against them, and Dallas is not by any means in the same, category as the Browns. So I think Browns defense is a good start. What about you?
I'm actually gonna go a little deeper because I was gonna initially say like the Ravens, but I think that's a little easy since they're playing the Jets. But I'm gonna go a little deeper. I'm gonna go with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They've actually been producing over the last couple of weeks. That last 2 weeks ago they were able to shut down your beloved Texans. Um, and I was able to score. Well, I don't know if it's about shutting them down, but at least they were able to score a lot of points on them. They produced 11 fantasy points against the Texans, and then last week against the Chargers. To me, that was a real shutdown. That they were able to shut down the Chargers. They beat them 35-6, and they scored 12 fantasy points. So this week they're going to go up against the Cardinals, even though it's at Arizona. I think they should be able to produce because they still do been turning the ball over a little bit, and they've been allowing the fourth most fantasy points to defense, the opposing defense. So if you need someone a little deeper streaming, maybe the Jaguars is your team.
All right, defense that I would sit, and then people are probably going to be like, "That's really crazy, Pablo." Just because I saw a graphic, I think it was like from Block Sports or someone of like the tiers of defense, and they had them in probably like the elite tier, I think. I'm talking about the Rams defense, but I think, um, especially if the Bucks cannot get it together after string of losses. Bright lights, Sunday Night Football against the Rams. I would sit the Rams defense this week. Even though Bucky Irving is still out, they put up a fight in Buffalo until the end. Were able to score 30 plus points. So yeah, I would sit the Rams this week. What about you?
This one, I think you're gonna love what I'm about to say, and that's a defense that you should sit. Is that they've actually they've produced the last couple of weeks by scoring 13 fantasy points and 9 fantasy points the 2 previous times they played. But this week and the next couple of weeks is going to be a brutal stretch for them, and that's the Dallas Cowboys. They've been, they've made some trades. They've been producing, but this week they're going to go up against Philadelphia, that allow the 25th worst fantasy points to opposing defenses. After that, they face Kansas City, and after that they face Detroit. So that's a brutal stretch right there. So you might want to double think starting them not only this week but the next couple of weeks. So you might want to look for another option.
Now, while I agree with that, I at least want to give them a shout out because they won me my matchup last week for getting a sack in the last play. So
There you
shout
go.
out to Cowboys defense for that at least. But yeah, I agree. They face a tough matchup in Philly, and like you said, have several tough matchups coming up. So just want to say thank you for everyone tuning in. If you would like to, spread the word, we're available on all major platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Like and follow. If you have any questions, you can reach me on X. That would be at Archreaper, ARCHREAPR. Leo, where can they reach you?
Yeah, thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions, you can reach me on X as well at Smooth1074. If you like, please like the show, tell a friend, share on social media, helps us out, and leave us some comments if you have anything you want to say. Let us know. Like I said, you can reach us or like the chat, and hopefully help you guys get some wins this week because the playoffs are coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Peace.